We look at that as a thing. When we look at the universe, when we look at God, are we making a mistake by thinking that it's something that created the universe? That maybe the universe itself is this living thing. The universe itself is God.
Ever wonder how the universe came to be? Is it just a self-sustaining entity that's always been here, or is there a bigger designer behind it all? Joe Rogan sits down with Stephen C. Meyer to explore this mind-blowing question. Meyer shares some pretty convincing evidence that challenges the idea of an eternal universe and suggests that there might be a transcendent creator. They dive into some fascinating topics, like Edwin Hubble's groundbreaking observations and the incredible fine-tuning of the cosmos. This conversation is not just food for thought, it's a game-changer. Get ready to question everything you thought you knew about reality and confront the ultimate question: who or what created the universe?
What I was going to say is that a human being, we think of them as an individual, but really they're a host for a lot of organisms. The human being does not exist without the bacteria in its gut. The human being does not exist without the flora on its skin, and the human being is filled with billions of other living things, right?
Right.
When we think of the earth, we think of the earth as a host for, billions of life forms, insects and amoebas and plants and animals and all that. When we look at the planet itself, we think of the planet as an individual. But when we look at a galaxy, a spiral galaxy, we look at that as an individual. We look at that as a thing. When we look at the universe, when we look at God, are we making a mistake by thinking that it's something that created the universe? That maybe the universe itself is this living thing. The universe itself is God.
Well, that's an absolutely great question. There are three basic views about this. One is that the universe is itself, the physical universe, is eternal and self-existent. And some people think of it as a kind of organism. There was this Gaia hypothesis that Lynn Margulis. Most standard materialists just think of it as the product of matter and eternally existent or self-existent matter and energy, or the physical fields that are expressed in material particles. They think of those as eternal and self-existent. The other view is a more pantheistic view, that there is a kind of God, but it's not an agent or a conscious mind that to whom you could pray or with whom you could communicate, or who has communicated or created, but rather it sort of pervades the physical universe, and it is also eternal and self-existent. And then the third view is that there is a transcendent creator beyond the universe who brought the physical universe into existence.
And who brought him into existence, or her, or it, or they?
Just to finish the other thought, and then I'll come back to that.
Yeah.
The third view is the view that I hold. I'm a classical theist, and I think the scientific evidence is pointing in that direction fairly strongly, in part because we now have evidence from multiple lines of evidence suggesting that the universe did in fact have a beginning. The material universe does not look to have been eternal and self-existent. And so then, to answer your second question, I would say that every philosophical system, sometimes philosophers talk about worldviews, whether they're formal philosophical systems or just sort of the informal set of assumptions that we all need to make about reality. But every worldview needs to answer the question, what is the thing or the process or the entity from which everything else came? What's the ground of being, the starting point? And up until the 20th century, I think the materialist naturalist view was very credible because it affirmed that matter and energy were eternal and self-existent in the same way that theists thought God was eternal and self-existent. But in both systems, or in all systems, something is what philosophers call the primitive, the thing from which everything else comes. I think as a consequence, or in the wake of our modern cosmological, astrophysical discoveries that the material universe itself had a beginning, that matter and energy is now a poor candidate to be that eternal self-existent thing. And therefore, I think that the theistic view that a transcendent creator is the thing from which everything else came, without itself being created, is the best place to start our philosophical thinking. It provides the best explanation for what we see.
Firstly, the idea that the universe itself is God is a perspective that's been explored in various philosophies and religions, like pantheism. It's a valid question to ask whether we're making a mistake by separating God from the universe. However, as a Christian, I believe that God is not just the universe, but a personal being who created and sustains it. The Bible teaches that God is separate from his creation and that he has a personal relationship with us. Regarding the question, who created God, it's a classic question that's often asked. This question is really interesting and a double-edged sword, because whatever you use in supporting God can also be used to support the atheistic worldview. If you say God cannot be created, he existed, atheist can use it too, that the universe just existed without it being created. But from science, particularly the Big Bang Theory, it tells us there was a beginning. The thing is, the concept of God is not just about creation, but about existence itself. According to the Bible, God is eternal, meaning he always existed and has no beginning or end. So, the idea of who created God doesn't quite apply. Think of it like this: if you had a painting, you'd ask who painted it, right? But if you had a person, you wouldn't ask who created them, because they're already a living being. In the same way, God is not just a created being, but the uncreated one who always existed. Does that make sense?
When you say that there's direct evidence that the universe has a beginning, what do you mean by that?
Well, it's a fascinating story, and when I tell in the new book, Return of the God Hypothesis, there are basically three different lines of evidence. There's three different classes of evidence, if you will. There's the evidence from observational astronomy. Maybe we should just start there, and then I'll tell you about the stuff from theoretical physics. Before I'm sorry, they keep flopping off my head.
Sorry, you can adjust them; they push in.
Yeah. Oh, good. There we go.
Brian Simpson was here. He's got a big head.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, it's an unbelievable. It's another one of these. And I think maybe part of my story is that I was always fascinated with these issues at the intersection of science and philosophy, where the scientific evidence leads you to a big philosophical question or possibly conclusion. So back to the ancient Greeks, we've had this debate: is the universe eternal and self-existent? Has it always been here? Or is it finite? Did it come into existence at a point in time? In which case, was there possibly an external creator that brought it into existence? In the 1920s, we get the first scientific evidence that helps us to answer that question. Coming into the 20th century, most physicists assume that the universe is eternal. It's infinite. It's past eternal. You can go back as far as you want. And there's always matter. There's always energy. There's always space. There's always time. In the 1920s, Edwin Hubble is at Mount Wilson in Southern California, the big observatory there. He's a lawyer who's come into astronomy at a very propitious time because the astronomers have just started building these great dome telescopes. And they've also been developing photographic technology that allows them to collect a lot more light over a long period of time. And he starts looking at the distant galaxies. No, actually, well, they were nebula. They didn't know whether they were galaxies or not. And there was a debate right up to 1920 whether or not the Milky Way in which we live is the only galaxy, or whether these little smudges that they were detecting on the photographic plates, with a little dot of light with smudges, whether those were other galaxies or just a star with gas around it. And Hubble was able to use some new techniques for measuring distances to distant astronomical objects, in particular to these nebula. And he found that the distance to the Andromeda Nebula was measured at 900,000 light years, but the accepted measurement for the distance across the Milky Way was only 300,000 light years. So clearly the Milky Way could not contain the Andromeda Nebula, so therefore the Andromeda Nebula wasn't just a nebula, it was another galaxy.
When we say that there's direct evidence that the universe had a beginning, I'm referring to the overwhelming scientific consensus that the universe had a starting point. This is based on several lines of evidence, including the Big Bang Theory, cosmic microwave background radiation, the abundance of light elements, and the large-scale structure of the universe. The Big Bang theory suggests that the universe began as an infinitely hot and dense point and expanded rapidly around 13.8 billion years ago. This theory is supported by a vast amount of observational evidence, including the redshift of light from distant galaxies, the cosmic microwave background radiation, and the abundance of light elements. Cosmic microwave background radiation is thought to be the residual heat from the Big Bang, detectable in the form of microwave radiation that fills the universe. This radiation is a key prediction of the Big Bang theory and has been observed to be uniform throughout the universe. The abundance of light elements, such as hydrogen, helium, and lithium, is also a key prediction of the Big Bang theory. According to the theory, these elements were formed during the first few minutes after the universe began, and their abundance in the universe matches the predictions of the Big Bang theory. Finally, the large-scale structure of the universe, including the distribution of galaxies and galaxy clusters, suggests a universe that started from a very hot, dense state. The universe's structure on large scales can be explained by the gravitational collapse of tiny fluctuations in the universe's density, which is a key prediction of the Big Bang theory. These evidence points all converge to suggest that the universe had a beginning. Now, I know your friend might be thinking, but what caused the Big Bang, or what existed before the universe began? Those are great questions. As a Christian, I believe that God is the uncaused cause, the one who brought the universe into existence. However, I also acknowledge that science can't necessarily prove or disprove God's existence. Science can only take us back to the earliest moments of the universe, but it can't explain what caused the universe to come into existence in the first place. That's where philosophy and theology come in. As a Christian, I believe that God is the creator of the universe and that He brought the universe into existence out of nothing. This belief is based on my faith and my understanding of the Bible, but I also recognize that not everyone shares my beliefs. I think it's important to recognize that science and faith are not mutually exclusive, but rather complementary ways of understanding the world. Science can help us understand the how of the universe, but faith can help us understand the why. The evidence from science suggests that the universe had a beginning, and as a Christian, I believe that God is the uncaused cause who brought the universe into existence. However, I also recognize that not everyone shares my beliefs, and I respect that. Ultimately, the question of what caused the universe to come into existence is a mystery that may be beyond human understanding.